Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 59, and we're going to talk about the problem or phenomena of projection and how it basically is costly, extremely costly hypocrisy. Now, if you have been listening, or if this is the first episode you're listening to, whatever, one of the things that bothered my father a lot, and he was a philosophy of religion PhD, right? So basically, it was a philosophy PhD, right? Was one of the things that bothered him a lot about my writing and a lot of the things that I say is the lack of a prescriptive conclusion, right? So I do all this explanation, I set the table with all this information, and then when I make my conclusion, I just simply say, the choice is yours, right? This is what you gotta decide to do. In other words, you have to make the choice. I'm not going to make a choice. I can share what choice I did, but generally I won't say what is the best choice or what is the right choice, because what that is, because we all know the subjective theory of value, right? What is the best choice or what is the right choice is going to appear differently to everyone, depending on their subjectivity. And that's what I've been saying since episode 00 or 01. So all I try to do is provide food for thought, try to bring up some downside risk that people, because of their narrow subjectivity, might have forgotten to consider, or some kind of upside potential that also is invisible to people who are narrowly focused on the negative side of some kind of phenomena. But at the end of it, it's always going to be your choice. Now, the goal is for me to set the table, throw out a couple of often unconsidered subjectivities for you to get the juices going, and then you're going to see other subjectivities and then make an even better choice, right? So hopefully, and I've seen this, and often people who have asked me for advice, they come up with an even better solution, one that I didn't even think of. And that's the goal, right? Is to sort of bring up some subjectivities that haven't been considered, get people thinking, oh yeah, I can think of this from a different perspective, and then come up with an even better one, right? And everyone is happy that way, right? Problems are solved, difficulty, worry, anxiety, all of that dissipates, right? And so my personal feeling is that problems are meant to be solved or resolved, not obsessed about. And that's what we see a lot today. People, uploading videos, obsessing about problems, right? Like it for them, they're happier living in the problem. And they want everyone to know they have this problem, but they don't want you to solve the problem. They want you to, have the pity party with them because they have a problem, right? So hopefully you guys understand that's why I don't make any prescriptions at the end of the episode. I just sort of, bring up a bunch of subjectivities. Now, obviously, in my personal life, I do make certain decisions, but that's just for me. And I often, generally don't share the choices that I've made because it might, unnecessarily skew people, right? But I don't want anyone to basically become me. That would just be really weird. All right. So the idea of projection comes from Sigmund Freud. And if you don't know who Sigmund Freud is, he's a psychiatrist person who studied mental illness. And he came up with lots of stuff on dreams, the ego, the superego, men fantasizing about their moms and daughters fantasizing about their dads, that kind of Oedipal. And what is it? I forget what the Oedipus is, the male wanting to marry their mom, and I forget Ophelia. I forget what the other one was. But anyway, so he came up with all that stuff. A little bit weird, okay, fine, but he also came up with this idea of projection, and the way he explains it, summary, is a process of displacing one's feelings onto a different person, animal, or object, right? So you are feeling certain things, you don't want to acknowledge it, so you basically are saying other people are doing it. So defensive projection is attributing one's own unacceptable urges to another. And obviously, when you says Freud says urges, right? I mean, anything goes. All right, but generally it comes up as we see it as accusing someone else of doing exactly what that person is doing. So psychology says seeing the self, right? Seeing yourself in other people. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, because when we see ourselves in other people, we can develop empathy, right? Oh, wow, it sucks to be like that, right? We commiserate with other people. This is the way that we can tap into how we can comfort other people who are experiencing really bad situations or events, right? So we empathize. We kind of know what it feels like, right? And of course, seeing the self in others might result in hatred, like, oh, how can that person do that? But of course, when it goes to hatred, you don't see that you're doing the same exact thing. And that's kind of why it's this sort of often unconscious, but you're kind of aware of it, but you don't see it in yourself, but you see it in other people. So why do people project? Because they're trying to avoid confronting it in themselves. And so a lot of this comes from the fear of the unknown, right? So if I do see it in myself and I do try to eradicate it, get rid of it in my own life, what's going to happen, right? And so that unknown aspect is what sort of contributes to the inability of people seeing it in themselves. So why project? Well, a trait is difficult to acknowledge. How they act towards other people might be how they feel about themselves, the whole self-hate thing. And it might be some form of denial, right? So basically, you don't want to see it in yourself. You don't want to see yourself as being a bad person. So it's not me, it's other people. Now, I've used certain words just now in the past 5 minutes that sort of should resonate. If you've been listening to a lot of the episodes that I've been making, then you begin to recognize really what's going on. It's just pretty much straight up hypocrisy, right? It's unnoticed, unaddressed, and you're not admitting it, right? So I explained in the first or second episode of this channel that people often will have higher expectations of others because they know why they are doing things which they so utterly despise other people doing, right? So for example, when your parents say, don't lie, and then you get busted for lying, but then you catch your parents lying, what do? And if you were a brave sort, you might say, hey, so you said never lie, but you just lied. And they'll say, well, I had a good reason. Well, you might have had a good reason too, but you see, there's that thing. They know why they lied, and so they can excuse it, but all they see is you're lying, and they say it's inexcusable. And of course, I said, if you're going to have a law that says don't ever lie, well, then you have to be the first person to abide by that rule or that law. And if you get busted, then you're busted, right? And so either you're going to punish yourself in the way that you punish your kids, or when your kids lie to you, you have to let it go unpunished. So it seems to me this projection phenomena, it might be a subcategory or a certain variety of hypocrisy, or basically it's another thing that humanities in the university does, and which is they come up with a new word to make it seem like you're talking about something different, right? So if you were to go up to people who are projecting and you say, wow, you're projecting, and you treat it as some sort of illness, and you got to go to counseling or whatever, you're denying, it's all about self-hate, and you got to get counseling and, to try to recognize it in yourself. Okay, you could do that. Or you can just straight up tell that person, no, you're being a hypocrite. So one is a little bit harsh. And so instead of just slapping a person with the word hypocrite, you can just sort of give it a fancy name and then try to treat it, right? But essentially at its core, it's just basically unrecognized, unadmitted hypocrisy. Now, I came up with this topic only because I saw some people accusing others and being suspicious of others that they might do something which they weren't really even considering doing, right? So, oh, I know what they will do. They would cheat me here. Even when the other person has no intention of cheating, right? They will see the cheating. And I thought about that. I was like, wow, that's kind of interesting. Oh, you know what it is? That's what they would do, right? And so you'll often see this kind of projecting certain kinds of behavior. And that was part of the explanation of projection as well, because they do it. Their mind will always go towards these certain options that people have, even if they weren't those other people they were thinking of, aren't thinking of it at all. But because they do all of the time, when they see other people, they see it in other people, right? And so they project what they're actually thinking, what they would do, what they would say, they project it onto other people. It's because their brain is already wired to go to those options to do those things, right? But they don't see it in themselves when they do it, okay? And that's classic hypocrisy, all right? So they have the knowledge and understanding that there is a potential moral problem. Like, so what they're saying other people are going to do, they get upset, they get outraged because they realize that there is a moral problem there. But of course, if they're projecting, they have that moral problem too. And probably, as the case with most people don't want to see wrong in themselves. They'd have to change a lot. And so they just simply project it and they don't admit that they do the same thing. And this is becoming a very, very prevalent, widespread sort of religiously affirmed phenomenon, right? So we see it in politics, right? We see Biden fans attacking Trump and all the Trump fans, right, for criminal wrongdoing, which I don't know, if you're sitting on the sidelines like I am, it's ludicrous, right? So yeah, okay, Trump might have, and if you listen to Judge Napolitano and his podcast called Judging Freedom, highly recommend it. It's great stuff because he looks at issues from a legal standpoint. He used to be a Supreme Court justice in the state of New Jersey. And so his illegal analysis is awesome. So Trump is in trouble. He did do things which could, technically speaking, according to the letter of the law, he could be in a lot of trouble. The problem, of course, is that laws can be bad, right? And that's one thing that he always had. So legally speaking, yeah, he's in hot water. Morally speaking, this law shouldn't exist, right? And so his analysis is also always awesome. You should give it a listen every once in a while. Let's see. So a lot of people will see all of the criminal wrongdoing in Trump, primarily because they hate Trump, but they love Biden. And so all of the acceptance of bribes, the influence peddling, the cover up of his son, and all of that, all of the failings of Biden, and really there are too many for me to list here. They can't see any of it, which is interesting, right? But that is what projection is. Another classic exercise in projection is ANTIFA, right? Now, first time I saw ANTIFA was years ago, and someone said, oh, it's like ANTIFA. And I said, what the heck is ANTIFA? And so I Googled it. I looked it up on the interwebs, and I saw that it stood for anti-fascist. And I just laughed for about a couple of minutes, not exaggerating. And I thought, that is so interesting that they will call themselves the anti-fascists. And so if anyone disagrees with them, they're fascists, right? Because they're the ones who are anti-fascist. So anyone who disagrees with them become the fascist. But if you look at their behavior is more fascistic than any of their opponents, which is kind of interesting. So is that a intentional strategy to make themselves untouchable and give them the ability to call everyone else a fascist, while therefore saying, no, but it's not us because we're Antifa, right? I thought that was very, very interesting. So it's either a severe case of projection or it's strategic. I think it's a little bit of both, especially not as far as the leadership of Antifa, but definitely the followers, the little underlings that dress up and carry out their acts of violence. Yeah, they definitely are projecting. U.S. foreign policy is another example. The war in Ukraine, oh, Russia, so bad, But, and just recently, I heard Judge Knapp talking to Phil Giraldi, who I believe he used to work for the CIA. And he wrote an article recently. You can find it on uns.com. But there he talked about the U.S. occupation of Syria. The United States right now occupies 1/3 of the country of Syria. What are they doing there? Well, they're occupying the oil-rich regions and the farm agricultural regions so that they can steal all the oil and also deprive the rest of the country of food. So the United States is starving portions of Syria by depriving them access to farmland, and they're plundering, one might say raping Syria of its oil, and you can dig a little bit deeper as to why they're doing this. But the United States is far worse when it comes to foreign policy than Russia will ever be. And to me, it's kind of obvious, unless you're projecting, in which case you'll just call me a Putin lover and, I'm evil, I'm a fascist, whatever it is people are saying. But it's hypocrisy, right? It's plain as day. Everyone in the world can see it, except people who are projecting. And then, of course, we have domestic policy, where you have certain agencies in the United States, like the Department of Homeland Security, calling certain people essentially terrorists in the United States, when in fact most of the extremism here in the United States is being carried out by them. I pointed out that this whole idea, I think it was in the in the previous episode, I was talking about Vivek and RFK Jr. and Javier Milei in Argentina, how there's a deliberate strategy of labeling them as right-wing extremists, right? Because Hitler was a right-wing extremist, so these guys are just like Hitler. Well, that's also a government agency practice, where people who don't disagree with them are right-wing extremists, including RFK Jr., who of course is a Democrat. His father and his uncle were Democrats, both of his uncles, actually, Ted Kennedy included. I forgot about him, as most people often do. But if you don't agree with them, then you're a right-wing extremist, right? So it's projecting, right? It's projecting their own right-wing extremism onto other people. So what should we do? Well, we have to figure out strategies to get people to see that they're projecting, that they're being hypocritical. They're super hypocritical, right? They're doubling down, tripling down, fanatically becoming narrow-minded, religiously fanatical about their projection. Here's an example. And so basically we have to come up with strategies to get people to see it. Here's an example. I want to give props to someone from whom I saw it. It's his Twitter handle is Kurt and in parentheses, libertarian. Check him out if you will. He doesn't post that much, but he posted this, and it was just so beautiful. Here, I'll read it to you. It goes like this. So someone posts, Bernie Sanders posts, healthcare is a human right. So he replies, so is gun ownership. And then someone says, no one is trying to take your guns, boomer. And he says, I'm not worried about people taking my guns. I want the government to pay for my guns. And then someone says, it's the right to be able to own a gun if you want it. It's not the right to be given guns. And then he replies, oh, is that how rights work? Right. So healthcare, if it's a right, yeah, you can have it, but the government is not supposed to pay for it, right? You can have it if you want. I thought it was beautiful, right? Because it illustrates, it's a mic drop moment kind of thing, but it also is a very, very out of the blue end around, coming through the back door, not that back door, our way of argumentation, which surprises someone, right? So you get someone totally invested in a line of thinking, and then bam, you reveal their hypocrisy. Now they get angry. The general reaction is anger, which is why I generally don't do it. That's not what I generally do, but it's beautiful nonetheless. And so coming up with an argumentation, a debate style, which brings out that hypocrisy. So what I did in the class is I would just say straight up on the first day, yeah, we don't do hypocrisy. And I illustrate all the examples of hypocrisy. And so whenever a student makes an assertion that's hypocritical, then I explain it to them, and then we move forward. Most people don't see the hypocrisy, but once you point it out, it becomes pretty obvious. And in the classroom, because we're just discussing certain kinds of books, certain books, it's pretty easy because we're talking about what someone else said, right? And I'm hoping that after doing it for an entire semester, or sometimes 2 semesters, if they take me twice, is that they begin to see it in themselves, right? And that's the goal. And that's how I did it. Now, for other people, personally for myself, to see my own hypocrisy, what I do is, deconstruction, which is what I went over in episode, I believe, episode 10 or 8, 7, episode 5, right? The first set of questions of deconstruction, where the question is define your terms. And so if we define the terms well, so that there are no exceptions, like you can't think of any exceptions for that definition, then you begin to see things that you previously could not because of the narrow subjective definition. We talked about this earlier, I won't go over it here, but a good definition will allow you to see more. It will also allow you to see what was hypocrisy. Okay. And so whenever I would stumble upon it through my definition, my reset definition, I realized, oh my gosh, that's hypocritical. And I would have to stop, right? That's what I did for myself, right? Because, hey, man up, right? This is hypocritical. You don't tolerate hypocrisy, so you got to stop doing it. I do that for myself. I don't know if other people are able to do that. And keep in mind that I taught in the humanities in the College of Liberal Arts, and the CLA is all about obfuscation, right? It's all about hiding and confusing and covering up and all. Some people will call that getting a PhD, but really all it is describing something in a certain way in order to do something different, right? So it's all about using words to pretend one is talking about something else when really you're still talking about that original thing, but you're using a different word, right? So this kind of projection unaddressed is bad, of course. Projection on the part of the government means that there's hypocrisy in government. That means injustice has the power. So injustice will not be unpunished, will not be punished, right? And that's why you see Donald Trump being indicted, I don't know, by 1,000th time, right? It's because they weaponized justice through projection, right? And if this is unchanged, it's going to get a whole lot worse, not just for people who like Trump or people who support him, but also everybody else in society, because the whole society suffers when injustice is part of the law. Now, in a normal society, just one more minute, in a normal society, without a central bank funding and papering over all of the injustice created by government, without that, everyone would feel the pain of hypocrisy, the injustice. You'll see it, it's in your face. And so people will push back against it, then it's more obvious to see. And so anyone who does engage in hypocrisy, they lose, whether it's an election or they get fined, they get punished, they have to be dragged to court. But until people begin to see that, then we're going to be living with a central bank that's papering over, basically paying everyone off for all the hypocrisy that exists in society. Well, welfare, corporate and family welfare, that's part of it too, to keep people in the dark. And so until we end the Fed, we have to wrestle with the injustice. And the problem, of course, is that the longer we wait, the longer it takes for people to figure it out, the more expensive all of this hypocrisy is going to be. We already see it in the inflation. We already see it in the death and destruction in the Ukraine and Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan. It's going to be huge, or should I say huge? All right. But in any case, hopefully more and more people are going to figure it out. Who knows? Because alternate media like this podcast has been labeled by the Department of Homeland Security as right-wing extremism. So hopefully any effort that they make will fail and all of us get to be able to have justice in our lives. Once again, I will talk to you in the next episode.